The 100-line Last Defense Academy is one of the most ambitious hybrid visual novels you'll ever find, with the likes of Kodoka and Uchikoshi, known for games like Zero Escape, Danganronpa and I, the Somnium Files, coming together along with others to create a game with 100 endings and a multitude of different routes. It was one of my most anticipated games of the year, and many hours later I have played through all those routes and seen those endings. It goes without saying it had some memorable ones, but also some pretty dire ones too, along with all those in between. So I'm going to take those routes and rank them from my least favourite to the best. Needless to say, these are all my opinions, so they are undoubtedly going to differ from many others. Spoiler warning as well, for obvious reasons. I will also not include the common route here because I just see that as a setup for the other routes. Still, that leaves 20 to go through, and obviously it's a long game, so in my recollection of these routes I might forget some details, but it is what it is. That being said, I could never forget the horror of this first entry. Right at the bottom, it was never in doubt what it was going to be, the worst route in this game is the serial battles route. Which, as it sounds, is basically a situation where from about day 50 you fight nearly every other day right till the very end of the 100-day period. It comes about if you make the choice to not let the Undying Flames boy join the SDU, which eventually leads to him using most of his power in a later fight, which means he now can no longer maintain the Undying Flame wall, which leads to more invader attacks. I hate this route with a passion. It has very little story significance outside of the final battle, and it was the only one where I audibly exclaimed to myself, "Oh come on, this is ridiculous." In the vanilla release of the game, you couldn't even skip many of these battles. Now some will say, because I've no doubt some masochist will try and defend it, that it's actually good writing because the player is feeling fatigue much like the members of the SDU, but there's a key difference. The members of the defense unit are having fun. The lack of rest and adrenaline combines into a dangerous concoction that basically turns each member into an invader killing machine. I, on the other hand, was not having fun, and had to move to another route by around day 70. Once I had more endings under my belt, I eventually went back, and thank God I could skip the battles when I returned. I imagine that was from an update. And even with that mercy, it was still tedious. The serial battles route is bottom of the barrel garbage. Now, coming in ever so slightly better than serial battles, but still being an absolute misery to play through, is the Box of Blessings route. This comes about after you kill Ava and then choose to look for Kako, who has gone missing. The Box of Blessings route pretty much has the same issue as serial battles, but instead of endless fighting, it's endless exploration. And once again, it's worse in the vanilla version of the game because you didn't have the option to skip it. What really grinded my gears with this one is that no matter what choice you make, whether that's joining the exploration team or joining the defense team, it's superfluous. You still end up searching for the boxes regardless, the only thing that changes is who you do it with. It seemed like a really good opportunity to explore the relationship between Kako and Ima in particular, but that quickly dissolves into nothing. And in most cases, it leads to unsatisfying endings. Shoma's branch is the best, and even that's lacking in my opinion. And then Gaku fakes out with supposed enlightenment only to wish for a harem right at the end. Unironically, that was probably my favourite ending of the 8, because it actually did make me laugh. In short, it had no right to be as long as it was for what little it offered to the narrative or characters. Next up is what I like to call the Wasted Potential arc, which is the conspiracy route. I don't remember too much of this route other than it was short, it had a multitude of different endings, and it hinted at something big in terms of the story but never really delivered, instead leaving that to one of the others. Now what really set my expectations for this is the vision that Kako has beforehand. She says that if Karara isn't saved in an upcoming fight, the SDU will move further away from the truth. So taking her advice, I saved Karara, and it led to a route that just didn't feel finished, which is a shame because the actual content is interesting. Nigo is hacked by someone called Goto, who is a part of the anti-Exodus faction up on the artificial satellite, whose whole purpose is to get the SDU to give up the fight and let humanity die. It centres around Takumi trying to convince the rest of the SDU to eventually give up the fight, mostly by sharing the truth of the group's backgrounds, which is never revealed here. It is interesting for sure, but it's just held back by those endings. They come rapidly in many cases, and many end with Takumi getting tased, which goes against the philosophy of the game, where each ending was meant to be wholly unique and stand on its own. You could say that maybe it's a taster for a much better route further down the line, but I just think the dead-end conclusions brought it down. Right, at number 17, might surprise a few people, but it's the slasher route. No doubt it has some decent pacing. I like the idea that the route splits quite notably between two different stories, one centered on a mysterious killer and another on the zombie outbreak. And overall, it provides a lot of context on not only the Gi parasite, but also feeds into the events of a route later on. My real issue with this route came in the lack of consistency concerning key concepts in the game. For one, you find out in other routes that the SDU were created so that humanity could fight back against the commanders who use Hemo Anima. The suggestion is that you fight Hemo Anima with Hemo Anima. Now this power apparently becomes null and void when facing someone in a leap suit. But that doesn't mean that Takumi, for instance, can't slice the power saw in two. Also, if Hemo Anima is only effective against other Hemo Anima users, then why can't they use it against the zombies? Maybe this was explained elsewhere, though I can't remember the justification. Sure, the zombies are more powerful physically, but it just makes these supposed powers useless. And even with that, the idea of the SDU survivors being helpless isn't even uniform, since Takemaru gets killed by a small group whereas Karara manages to fight them all off. This is where the game really starts to show issues with the multiple writers for me. It has good elements in places, especially in regards to building up another route, but its lack of consistency in concepts brings it down. Number 16 might surprise a few people too, as I'd wager some would have it dead last, but it's the comedy route. This comes about if you choose to dodge the attacker rather than counter-attack, causing them to roast in the undying flames. Now what's really weird about this route is that if you chose to fight back, you get one of the darker routes in the game, but by dodging, you somehow end up in this weird route that feels like it has no stakes whatsoever. It kind of worked in my favour though, since I was coming off the zombie part of the slasher route where everything is bleak, so coming into this one straight after was a nice change of pace, even if most of the story developments were tied to skits and gags which made them feel inconsequential. It's an absurd route that clearly doesn't take itself too seriously, and as such I appreciated it for what it was. Number 15 is going to be yet another of the joke arcs, which is the romance route. This comes about when Takumi tries to lay the smackers down on Hiroko and she basically pushes him off a roof, causing him to have visions of relations with 3 of the other heroines. That's Karara, Kyoshika and Tsubasa. Apparently they also had this dream, and as such Moko acts as the resident Scylla Black, giving each heroine 25 days with Takumi to try and make him fall for them, starting with Karara and ending with Tsubasa. It's not the deepest route thematically, it's more focused on the characters themselves, though it does give a lot of backstory to Kyoshika, who is my personal favourite of the SDU members. That's equally great as it is disappointing, as Kyoshika should have had her moment to shine in the zombie route, but it doesn't really materialise into much. It's another one of those arcs that isn't taking itself too seriously, especially when you see the ending where you can effectively choose the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 conclusion and date them all. This one was alright. Which is an apt description for the 14th entry, which is the mystery route. It's quite similar to the slasher route in that it acts as a setup for another arc, but also takes on a similar premise in that the members of the SDU are slowly picked off by a mysterious killer. As such, the issues I had with the slasher route in terms of consistency of concepts remain here, but I found myself enjoying the mystery route more. I think it had better pacing, I liked the idea of having to actively choose the killer out of the entire cast by piecing together the clues, and of course you don't find out the real killer until you've progressed through into another route. In addition, the themes of distrust are rampant, especially as the situation becomes more desperate, and I think it culminates quite well in the endings when the only remaining survivors are Moko, Nozomi and Takumi, one of which sees Nozomi throw herself into the flames from despair. I still have problems with this one, but it's starting to veer into the good territory from this point. And the same holds true for entry 13, which is the Cult of Takumi route. This is one of the narrative whiplash stories. It's one that feigns happy times, but quickly descends into nightmare territory. It comes about if Takumi chooses to sacrifice Takemaru to detonate the Undying Flames bomb, which in a way shows how important Takemaru is to the group. He may be headstrong, but he's also one of the members who keeps the group together through his grounded nature. In a situation where he leaves the group early, you get a situation like the Cult of Takumi. Yugamu convinces Takumi to take some aphrodisiac pills that basically manipulate the SDU to love him as their leader. It starts innocently enough, but eventually moves into fanaticism, with the only one unaffected being Nozomi due to her low cryptoglobin levels. Now, it leads to a lot of, let's say, fan art involving the characters, but these blissful times soon change for the worse. The Cult of Takumi route has conclusions like the Overlord ending, where Takumi effectively embraces his role as tyrant, believing that he and the SDU should take full control of the satellite and the humans living upon it, but it also has stuff like the Living Idol conclusion, which to me is one of the darkest endings in the game. Not only does it lead to Nozomi being brutally beaten down by his zealot followers, but it also results in Takumi becoming that living idol, an object of affection and nothing more than that. This route, in addition to the next one on the list, clearly play on the theme of free will, the idea that the SDU will never succeed through forced manipulation, and though Cult of Takumi has some issues especially in regards to basing, it does have good payoff. Right, now we're moving on to the routes that I consider to be good, like there's a jump in quality from this point onwards, and it starts with the 12th entry, which is the casual route, another case of narrative whiplash. This one really plays on the antagonistic nature of Sirei as he goes to extreme lengths to keep his secrets away from the SDU, Takumi in particular. As such, Takumi is brainwashed into a state of tranquility and bliss where all his friends who passed away up till this point are alive and they live out a mundane existence, effectively meaning Takumi has retaken that boring mundane life from the start of the game. However, the reality is that Takumi is acting out these hallucinations while all his friends merely see the Takumi on the outside, who looks like he's completely lost his mind. It feels oddly cathartic watching Takumi and Eito being cage brothers for instance, but also quite creepy in how it's handled with the moments where Takumi regains slivers of lucidity, where his mind is trying to piece together the truth of what is actually happening. And in a way, it's karma for Sirei as his desire to have this obedient soldier completely backfires. By taking away Takumi's individual will and personality, he can no longer be the leader that the SDU needs, and they effectively fall apart, which is shown in one of the endings where Takumi chooses to leave the dream. No such horror in the 11th placing, though still quite bittersweet, it's the Ava route. Now Ava is a character who doesn't get much focus throughout the game, and many of the routes she's simply a pawn of the SDU, brainwashed by Sirei to simply fight invaders, though her relations with the students does vary between them. The Ava route though is one of the only ones where her brainwashing is reversed. As Takumi reminds her of her adopted daughter Kamyun, it's enough for Ava to start to think for herself once again, and eventually leads to her escaping with the help of Takumi. From there, Takumi and Ava meet Kamyun along with various other innocents who were affected by the war, and the two develop feelings for each other over that time. Needless to say, it's a character-focused route mostly centered on Ava and Takumi, and though it's quite short, it's written well in the majority. I might have preferred a little bit more between them in the lead up to that romance blossoming when they go to the campsite or whatever it was, but otherwise, it gets the job done. Not to mention it gives a different perspective on the war by seeing it through the eyes of the Futurans. And that shift in perspective also remains for number 10, which is the Rebellion route. Again, it's another route focused on the Futurans, so the SDU choose to stop fighting for humanity and instead fight for the rebellion led by Kamyun, who sadly isn't introduced until quite late into the route. I think that might have given a bit more emotional depth to the route if she was brought in earlier, especially when considering Ava is killed in this arc. If the SDU chooses not to fight with the rebellion, it pretty much ends with a thud. The message is clear here, there are no winners in war. If they choose to make peace with the Futurans, however, it leads to a surprisingly happy ending. Though it takes a bit of time, it's suggested that the planet will go on to experience a period of prolonged peace following the events of Last Defense Academy. I do have to praise this route for presenting two emotionally tough choices at the end as well, where Takumi has to choose between his own interests or the good of the planet, which obviously calls into question the morals of his character. It's a good route overall. And yet another Futuran-focused story at number 9, which is the Vexness route. Now, when I discussed this game with a friend of mine who finished the game before me, I was surprised to hear how much she loved the Vexness route. It was in her top 3. I don't echo those same sentiments. For me, it was just a middle-of-the-pack route, though it does steer more towards the good side considering the content within it. If you choose Tsubasa to blow up the Undying Flames bomb, she will be too scared to see it through, and it leads to the SDU members being taken prisoner by the commanders. In particular, Takumi and Vexness start to have periodic one-on-one conversations as they try to learn more about the other. My real issue with this route came in 2 areas. Firstly, it was one of the last routes I did, and as such I was too used to seeing Vexness as a power-hungry tyrant and nothing more. While this route attempted to give more depth to her reasoning for obtaining power, it didn't shift my opinion on her specifically. And secondly, I wanted more focus on the other commanders. Little is given on Ad-Hoc, but that's about it, especially to explore the growing animosity they had towards Vexness in particular. It's clear from this route that the commanders are not unified, so seeing the politics of their internal struggles would have been great. Still, I appreciate the insight it gives into a character who is harder to understand from the outside looking in. At number 8 is the sister route to the Box of Blessings, which is the Box of Calamity. No doubt much better than the prior one, but I can't deny it's held back by a notable split in quality between the stories that take place within it, those being the ghost part of the route, which is great, and the curse part of the route, which ranges from great to tedious. The ghost part is really good, because Takumi soon discovers that the ghost is a materialization of his inner guilt from killing Ava, while the curse route eventually leads to the discovery of the Gi parasite along with its biology and life cycle. Now the curse route is where it splits in quality, because on one side, if you choose to side with Gaku, you go through a plan of exercising the curse that afflicts the SDU, and it sucks. It's one of the only times where I use the skip button outside of the morning announcements. The one focused around the Gi is much better though, especially as the remaining survivors attempt to discover the true identity of the Gi Queen's host, who happens to be Nozomi. This not only serves as a build-up for a later route, but also shows just what the Gi Queens are capable of. At number 7 is a branch away from arguably the true ending of the game, which is Goodbye Ato. The only downside to this one, it's short. That's the only thing that holds it back for me, as I wanted a bit more meat to the developments it brings because the actual content for the route is top tier. It's already interesting because Ato throughout most of Last Defense Academy is an out and out villain, so actually trying to grapple with the reality that he might have changed is a tough pill to swallow, even when considering the lengths he goes to by gouging out his own eyes, which from my memory is the most deliberate act he does to gain forgiveness from the other members of the SDU. If Takumi makes the choice not to forgive him, Ato leaves the academy blind in an attempt to survive alone. And I appreciate how the perspective of the story immediately changes as he molds over his hatred of humanity, how he came to his position and whether he deserves forgiveness at all. No doubt many would struggle to forgive Ato based on his actions and other routes, but I like seeing the workings of a mind that is attempting to see the error of its ways. Number 6 is the other route that can be considered the true one depending on how you look at it, and the only one that gives the supposed golden ending where everyone survives, which is the Steady Fundamental or SF route. This is the route that I personally had a lot of expectation to, simply because a lot of its content was locked behind the events of other routes. It was a convergence point in many respects. SF provides a bunch of answers on some of the more confusing aspects of the story up until this point, and for me it does it well. The twists of the route and how others set this one up is good in the majority, while adding some solid development to Hiroko and the relationship she has with Takumi. I was not a fan of Hiroko in those first 100 days, but when you realise she's effectively been stuck in the loop for around 40 years, you can sympathise with the plight as she tries to find a way out. Even a cool and collected character like her reveals elements of vulnerability and desperation throughout this route, and there's no doubt to me that the relationship between her and Takumi props it up, considering the other characters are mostly sidelined. I also like how certain elements in other routes are recontextualised, seeming confusing at first glance but given closure through this story. The real issue I have with this route is simply that it opens up or doesn't resolve more plot threads like the person in the lab coat, the home planet of the Gi, the supposed spaceship. I was hoping that this was the route where it would all come together, so it does suggest to me that there is DLC planned for the future. Even so, it's still one of the best. Breaking into the top 5 now, and these pretty much all fell right into place for me. There was no issue with placing them. At number 5 is the multiple Atos route, and I commend this route purely for how horrifying it is. This comes about when Takumi decides to kill Ato for a second time after he escapes, and because of the wonders of Himo-Anima, Takumi manages to absorb a portion of the consciousness of Ato himself, meaning that there are now effectively 2 people within the same body. Through this internal battle, Takumi visualises Ato taunting him, who also adjusts his perspective so that every member of the SDU looks like Ato. Though once again it's a fairly short route and the developments are rapid, I really appreciate the seeming hopelessness of this route. There is no situation where Takumi wins effectively, with the best outcome being the ending where Ato is basically stuck in his consciousness forever, though Takumi maintains control of his body. The most disturbing ending is undoubtedly the one where Takumi challenges Ato to a game of endurance, killing himself again and again in an attempt to force him out. In the end, Ato wins that fight as well. If this doesn't drill in that killing Ato is not the answer, I don't know what does. At number 4 is what you could say is another horror arc in the Retsnum route. This is the Darumi story. Most of her development comes here, and I liked it a lot. This comes about when Takumi decides to abandon the students of second to last Defense Academy except for Nozomi, and that results in Darumi surviving the upcoming fight. In light of this, while the other members of the SDU start to turn against Takumi, Darumi comes to his support, thanking him for saving her life. It basically becomes a situation where it's these two versus the world, and in not only his guilt but desire to revive the friends he has lost, Takumi searches out the blood tear of Retsnum, which apparently has the ability to bring back the dead, which eventually sees the weird organism fusing with Darumi. No doubt she is the star of this route. As Takumi starts to realise that Darumi puts up this weird facade to push others away, she simply doesn't want to get close to anyone as she believes it will only lead to pain. And it demonstrates the dichotomy of her character that underneath all that chaotic energy, she's actually one of the most compassionate within the group. And it's only fitting that come the end, it's Darumi who effectively saves everyone. Okay, we're into the top 3 now, and taking the bronze medal is going to be the coming of age route. This is a story that really shouldn't work, but it does. It's a mixture of hilarity, camaraderie, great development for certain characters, and a satisfying conclusion right at the end. It's just such an enjoyable route with some of the most hilarious imagery throughout the game, like the training montage, and it's unashamedly positive for the majority. It's all about the power of friendship here, and compared to how dire the situation gets in other routes, this one is welcome, considering how well it's executed. I also appreciate that it's one of the only routes where Shion is given more of a focus, actively taking part in activities alongside the STU, and it's one of the more romantically involved routes outside of the obvious romance subplot mentioned before. It's all brought together beautifully with that final battle against Eito, which sadly is one of the only times we get to hear the best song in the game. It's not thematically deep, if anything it's right on the nose with what it's aiming towards, but it does it well. Number 2 is going to be the killing game route, which to be honest is no surprise that it ended up so well considering the history of Kodoka with this concept. It materialises quite early on into the 100 days. Takumi chooses to kill Eito, and it eventually leads to a threat levied at the SDU, where they are told to take part in a killing game by the mysterious sponsor. This involves hunting invaders outside the school grounds, so the risk of death is very real, and thus gaining points which goes towards a score. The one at the bottom of the round is killed by the sponsor's army of bees. The killing game route has a lot going for it. There's the desperation of the situation, which sees the SDU pretty much split in terms of allegiance, one of the only times where they are this hostile to one another, and it also gives some great characterization to a large number of the cast like Yugamu, Darumi, Tsubasa and more. In addition, there's the struggle to try and defeat the sponsor outright before more damage is done. What I really like about this route is that not only is it well paced with a well deserved conclusion bringing it together, but it's clear that even though the SDU are split, they still hate themselves for being forced into doing so. At the end of the day, they don't want to kill the others just so they can survive, but the situation is so dire that they have no other choice. All in all, it's one of the best routes in the game by a distance. Which leaves us with the top spot, and I'm sure some will now know what it is. It's the second scenario, which eventually leads to the farewell Last Defense Academy ending. The reset ending is a bit whatever to me, but the situation where the SDU defies Zero for the final time is where it's at its best. Basically, it's the complete opposite of the golden ending from the SF route, as no one survives except for Nozomi. And to me, this is the canon ending, simply because of the extra mile that went into presenting it. It's the only one that has a unique cutscene at the end outside of the common route, the credits are slightly different, it has a unique battle rounding it out, and a lot of the backstory surrounding the SDU is revealed here, including their role in the reclamation of a world for humanity. Yes, it ends bleak, it's bittersweet in many regards, but what I love about this route is that considering the revelations the members have to deal with in relation to their purpose, their memories, and all of this information that would demoralise even the most staunch of individual, this feels like the one time where they truly think for themselves within the arc. The moment where they come together and decide together that they want to save the Futurans, and their resolve is so strong that they're willing to give up their lives to see it through. It's tragic, but it's beautiful at the same time, and like I say, I see this as the true ending for a number of reasons. If you have to play any of the routes, then at least play this one. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.